This is the Matt Burns Podcast with Davey Deals. Welcome back to the second Matt Burns Podcast. I am your host, Huggy Bear Seriously, and today my guest is Davey Deals. Thank you very much for joining us. And before I forget, because this happens to me every time, I'm going to ask you now to like, share, and subscribe. And comment down below if there's a wrestler that you want me to have a chat with. All right? Thank you very much. And my guest here, Davey Deals. Thanks for bringing me here. And really appreciate you taking the time. Now, you have been wrestling for some time. And I imagine you're having a great time with it. When was the first time that you started watching wrestling yourself?
So my father passed away when I was 2, and my mom started dating again, and she ended up marrying probably a few years later. My stepdad at the time was huge into wrestling, so basically from the age of like 3 to 4, so that would have been like 87, 88. So I was right in the golden era of wrestling and started watching it then, and Hulk Hogan was the man back then, and I was just blowing my little mind, and I definitely got hooked since then,
You made a mention of Hulk Hogan. Is there any others that are kind of more your top tier wrestling?
Back then, I was huge into the Rockers, Shawn Michaels, Marty Jannetty. Like their tag team, like they just flowed so well, And then of course Bret Hart was around the Hart Foundation, and then I started to like him, and all those guys. Undertaker, was able to see him versus Yokozuna in a house show in a casket match.
Ooh.
In the early 90s and stuff. So yeah, I got to watch a lot of wrestling when I was a kid, and I got to go to live shows because I lived in Coquitlam, and so in Vancouver all the time. And yeah,
there was a lot there.
There was, yeah. It was good. It was like the perfect era to grow up in, you know.
Was there any big stadium shows that you go to?
Yeah, it was like BC Place Stadium or GM Place, or I think it was BC Place at the time. So yeah, big events for sure.
Wow, that'd be cool.
And then basically in the 90s, I remember Rock Bottom specifically was at GF Place. It was on my 14th birthday, and we had watched wrestling, up into the Attitude Era and a little bit past, right? So Stone Cold and Undertaker and The Rock and all those guys, right? So
yeah, well, I completely understand that. So we already talked about your. When did you start getting into wrestling?
So basically, it's kind of a long story. Like I used to wrestle with my brother growing up, right? And we used to kind of do the backyard thing in our backyard with our friends and stuff like that. And then, I used to be able to do Hurricane Ranas back in the day. Like we'd go to the beach and wrestle and stuff, and we'd kind of put on shows for whoever was around, kind of kick the crap out of each other. And until I landed on my head doing a Hurricane Rana, I think I started to get a lot taller than my brother, right? So basically what got me into the business was that in basically the late 90s, the federation called ECCW, they used to come up to the Okanagan, and so back then, my brother and I, we decided to see if we can do ring security and setup and stuff like that. And I was only a kid, teenager. My brother was always a couple of years older than me, right? But we started doing security and ring setup and getting to know the guys and all that. And next thing you know, they're doing, Kelowna, Vernon. I think they do Penticton every now and again. And so that's basically how I started to kind of get into things. And then they stopped coming up, and when I graduated, I kind of stopped watching wrestling for a little while. And then it was like 2014. I was walking down the mean streets of Peachland, and I see this wrestling poster, and I'm like, holy crap, wrestling's back in the Okanagan. And I take a look at the poster, and I see, the Black Dragon's still wrestling. Here we are 15 years later. I'm like, holy crap, I gotta go say hi. So I ended up saying hi to the Black Dragon. He's been all over. He was in Japan fighting Ultimo Dragon, and he grew up with the Hearts and Lance Storm and Chris Jericho. And so we hit it off again, kind of, reintroduced myself to him. It had been so long that he remembered me. And I got introduced to Nick. And so I asked Nick, hey, you guys need help? And he was like, oh yeah. So started doing ring security setup again. And then, 2016, the opportunity to train came up. And Colin Cutler took a bunch of us under his wing. There was a few other people there at the time. There was a guy named Michael McCaw. He was from New Zealand. He was wrestling. He'd actually been on TV in New Zealand back then. It was kind of cool. So then we got to train. It was basically 6 months. Colin started us all off with blow-up drills and basically a few guys dropped off the map at that point because you want to be serious about wrestling. Back then things were a little bit different. It was only 8 years ago, but so you kind of had to prove your worth a little bit. And I was one of the older guys. I was against, everybody else, Camaro Cope, and back then was Chucky and Jade came in a little bit later. There was just a handful of us, Scarlet Black, and but they were all 5, 10, Jace Darcy, Braden. They were all younger than me, right? And I was the older guy, kind of trying to get in it. I was 32 years old. So training was fun. It took a while. It took a lot of bumps. Took a lot of injuries. But I made it through somehow. And and then you get to pick up little seminars here and there as well. Basically there's, I had a lot of psychological seminars with Mick Foley, Al Snow, D'Lo Brown was just here, and I've had training with Billy Gunn. We did some ring training, Chris Masters, bunch of other guys, that kind of Silas Young. I can't even name them all off the top of my head. But so you get to kind of educate a little bit more with those guys and kind of learn the trade and kind
of. So during these seminars, like you get to learn from people that have been on TV. Do you find that the training that they provide you is helps a lot, even for the independent shows?
Oh yeah, for sure. It's wrestling's a very athletic sport, but it's also about, I'd say show, you have to move, the way that you move in the ring also has to look professional, and the way that you act, the way that you interact with the fans. There's just so much to learn. It's that's one thing I like about the business, is that it's non-stop learning. And as soon as you stop learning, you might as well quit, right? So
exactly.
Yeah.
After your training, when did you actually start getting into the ring full time?
It was 6 months later. I debuted on basically May days in May of 2017, and we had our first matches in front of fans, and I don't think it went really well. It was interesting. It was a fun, I think it was probably Battle Royale, and there was a bunch of guys that usually they'd come up from the coast, and a lot of the veteran guys would come up and have matches with us, green guys. And I had a lot of good experience with that. I mean, Clark Connors, he's on New Japan right now. I think he was one of my first matches, and I remember him hitting me off the top rope with a flying crossbody, and it just hit me hard and flapped to the ground. And I just remember, so this is what it's like, just gotta be out there and do your thing. And so
because a lot of people, when they talk about wrestling, because they use that trope of, oh, it's fake, but not realizing how much pain goes involved in this business.
Oh yeah.
And how much you actually go through. Like, how many injuries have you gone through?
I've done quite a bit over the years. I've chipped both elbows multiple times. Even when you wear your elbow pads, sometimes they'll slide down and I'll take a bump outside. I can beat an elbow bumper sometimes, which isn't good. I've cracked ribs a couple times. So the one year, I tore my bicep right off my elbow. So my bicep was up here. Had to have surgery, probably missed. Took me about 6 months to rehab, but I probably missed about 9 months of wrestling right there. So it was my biggest injury. I've had a couple concussions. and just tweaks here and there. Like I took a snap suplex early on in my career, and my ankle hasn't been the same since. And my left knee's kind of, it's good, but I tweaked it once or twice. And so yeah, there's always something like that happens, right? So you just kind of have to go with the flow and work with your injuries. And a year ago, I basically almost dislocated my shoulder. My physio was like, I'm surprised it didn't pop out with the way that your symptoms and all that, right? So yeah, it's definitely a difficult sport for sure. And when people say fake, I don't like it, but at the same time, yeah, it's something that we're athletes, and it's a show, and the injuries are real, and you just kind of have to keep going when the injuries happen. Like when I tore my bicep right off my elbow, that was right at the beginning of the match, and it was a 15-minute hardcore match, and I was still able to pick him up and all that, surprisingly, and get through the match. And then basically near the end of the match, I realized I couldn't pick the table up, and I'm like looking at my elbow. I just thought it was like a strain. I didn't really feel it all that much, and until I looked at it near the end of the match, I'm like, oh no, I knew right away my bicep was up here. And finished the match and straight off to the hospital, and that was that. So
a lot of you getting through the match. This is just the adrenaline.
Oh yeah,
putting on this.
I just felt like I just thought it was a strained bicep the whole time, but your adrenaline's going so much, and you don't feel the pain, of what you would normally feel. But the injury itself actually wasn't all that bad. It wasn't very painful, but when I had the surgery, man, the pain from the surgery was like pretty brutal. And it has a lot to do with turning back and forth like this, your supination, pronation.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I was pretty buggered there for a while. Like I had to be in a cast for about 2 months every day to try to straighten it back. It's weird having an arm that's stuck like this, and you have to try to straighten it every day until finally you get it straight. And then you start off with 5 pounds, or I started off with 3 pounds trying to rehab it, and took about 6 months total and about a year for the pain to fully go away. But yeah, I'm finally back up to full strength, curling the 45 pound dumbbells. So I'm back up and back at her,
So a lot of times, most of the wrestlers have personas that they portray, and right now you're
in transition.
Yeah. Where do you get your ideas on how you're going to be portrayed in the ring?
So the story of the Davey Deals spiritual yoga kind of character, it actually comes from one of my trainers, Michael McCaw. He was like a high-flying hippie, and he was a good guy, right? And so he's like, why don't you be my tag team partner, and why don't we just kind of go with this? And he ended up moving back to New Zealand, and I kind of started to carry on the character, and I'm like, hey, what can I do to get the fans mad at me? How can I act? And that's when the whole yoga mat thing came out, and I'm like, hey, I'm a hippie and I'm doing yoga. And then next thing you know, yeah, the yoga sucks chants are starting, and I'm like, okay, I'm on to something. Nobody else does anything like this, right? So yeah, that's basically how that, and then I kind of developed it into like a spiritual guru kind of character. Like I started off the yoga master, and then into a spiritual kind of enlightened cult-like kind of character. But yeah, and then now I'm just kind of transitioning into more of just a same yoga character, just more of a douchebag, I guess.
So yeah, the characters basically are you keep them more because the audience is already reacting to that.
Yeah.
So why would you change it?
Yeah, why would you change it? Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different characters out there, and I think what I like about my character is that I can do some comedy with it too. Davey Deals can always be in precarious positions, or whatever ends up happening, and it's just part of the show kind of thing, right? So
yeah, there's been a lot of shocking things that I've seen over the last little while. Hey, one last question, if they're okay. If there's one piece of advice that you have for anyone who's wanting to get into the wrestling business, what was the first thing?
Well, first thing, you got to be in shape. I mean, yeah, like I said at the beginning of training, there was guys that were coming in that weren't in shape, and the gym's the number one thing, you know. Be prepared for injuries, you know. It's a tough grind. You have to stick through all the training and just kind of keep going and work your way through. Like everything, you have to start off at the bottom, and you kind of put your nose down and to the grind, and try not to speak too much. You know, you just kind of go through your matches, and people will notice you, right? And yeah, that's basically, as far as advice. I think Mr. Perfect said it best, and I saw Jade say it on another interview, is that basically you have to get in to get out. Because once the adrenaline gets you hooked, you know, you get injured and stuff, and you're just like, okay, how, you know, like, it's a tough business for sure. And there's people that can be difficult, but at the end of the day, it's very worth it. Yeah, so it's just perseverance, really, too.
Yeah. Well, I really do appreciate you taking the time, and I'm looking forward to seeing you back in the ring, and I wanted you to kick some ass and have a little bit of fun. For the second time, to like, share, and subscribe, and comment down below. Want to make sure that we get quality content to you. If there's any wrestlers you want me to get a hold of and have a little chat with, please let me know. Thanks again. Bye for now.